The court building was quiet. The guard didn't have to stand, there was no one to check on. He sat down on a chair and opened a magazine. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It sounded like whoever was opening it was having difficulties. I stood up quickly and hurried to the heavy oak door, pushing it gently. In the doorway stood a skinny 6-year-old boy with a scraped knee and big sad eyes full of determination. Squeezed against his chest was an old stuffed rabbit. "What are you doing here?" I asked sternly. "Children don't belong in court." "I need to see my father," muttered the boy and ran towards the turnstile. He quickly ducked under the barrier and made his way further into the building. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, running after the boy. He ran down the corridor and stopped abruptly right in front of the judge's chamber. Without hesitation, he grabbed the door handle and pulled. I didn't reach him until he was already inside the chamber. "Judge Moreno," he just burst in. I didn't even have time to react. I gasped. "Daddy!" the boy shouted and ran towards the judge. "You really are my father, aren't you?" Judge Moreno stood up from his desk and looked at the child. An image flashed before his eyes. He was 5 or 6 years old. He had just discovered that his father drove the truck that delivered groceries to the store near his house. He had run into the man's arms just like that boy, but the man had pushed him away, called him a stupid kid, and started unloading crates of beer. At 37, he remembered it as if it had happened yesterday. The judge looked into the child's eyes. Where had he seen them before? They were so familiar. Of course, the boy from the orphanage. He often visited there and was called the orphanage's benefactor. Charity was an important part of Judge Moreno's life. He lifted the child into his arms, looked deeply into his eyes once more, and smiled. "Son, you've finally found me," he said. The secretary and the guard were stunned. Gustavo Moreno and his mother lived in his grandfather's house. Despite his grumbling, the old man loved his daughter and grandson. Poverty was the family's constant companion. The grandfather fished and sold fish at the village market, while his mother worked for a farmer. Gustavo never saw his father, nor did he know who he was. His mother abruptly shut down any attempt to learn about the man. Over time, the boy stopped asking. Then the local kids decided to play a trick on the naive Gustavo Moreno, telling him that Bruno, the driver who delivered goods to the local store, was his father. He believed them, desperate to have a real father in his life. But little Gustavo only gained another childhood trauma when he ran to hug that angry truck driver. He cried for 2 hours in the attic of his dilapidated house before falling asleep. His mother and grandfather searched frantically for him. Life changed dramatically when his grandfather passed away. He went fishing and never came back. They found him in the boat. He managed to tie it up on his way back from fishing, but his heart simply stopped, refusing to beat any longer. There was nothing left to hold mother and son in that godforsaken village. The mother decided to move to the city. Money was tight, but she decided to take a chance. There were more opportunities for her and her son in the city. Everything fell into place from the start. The mother got a job as a cleaner at the school Gustavo started attending. They lived in an annex of the school building where the janitor used to live, but the janitor's old quarters had been abandoned for several years. Then Yolanda married a teacher from the school. Gustavo got a little sister, Kida. Gustavo studied well, assimilating everything quickly. He was determined to get a good job and get out of poverty. One day, he asked his mother, "What's that building opposite our house?" "It's an orphanage," his mother replied. "There live children who have no one in this world. You see, there are 2 buildings. One is for the very young, and the other is for children aged 3 and over." "Why don't they have anyone?" Gustavo asked. "That's how it happens. For example, the parents have died and there's no one to look after the poor children." The boy felt sad. He wanted to do something good for those children, but he didn't know what or how. One day, he and his little sister were walking past the orphanage fence and noticed a little curly-haired girl crying, huddled against a tree. "Why are you crying?" Kay asked her. "Today they took Miguel home, and I'm going to live here forever." Tears ran down the little girl's cheeks. "Don't cry. I'm going to give you my bunny. He's magical and makes wishes come true," Kay said, slipping the stuffed toy through the bars of the fence. Really? The girl stopped crying for a moment and asked, Really? What's your name? Elena. The rabbit will always protect Elena and bring her luck. It will do that. Always keep it with you and don't give it to anyone. Then everything will be very good in your life. They moved on, but for some reason Gustavo often remembered that little girl's face, especially at night, lying sleepless in bed. The years passed. Gustavo entered law school. He rose quickly through the ranks and, at the age of 30, became Judge Moreno. He remained in the city where he and his mother had moved from the village. His stepfather and mother moved to the neighboring town where the former teacher was offered a position at a private school. This happened while Gustavo was still at university. Gustavo achieved the goal he had set himself in childhood, when that mustachioed truck driver rudely pushed him and called him a fool. He became a successful man with a substantial fortune, dedicating his whole life to his career. At 37, he still hadn't started a family, although if he wanted to, a crowd of beautiful women would surround him. But he kept his finger firmly pressed to the gavel, an integral part of any court case. No one could have imagined that a judge with an impassive gaze could talk to a boy in a crumpled t-shirt and a scraped knee like that. "Shall we?" Gustavo said, holding the boy with one hand. "Where to?" the boy asked softly. "To the shelter," the judge answered succinctly. The secretary and the security guard exchanged glances. Judge Moreno simply didn't want to cause the boy any pain, but now he would just return him to the shelter, which would cause the same pain, only a little later. That's what these two thought. "Why the shelter?" the boy asked tearfully. "We need to tell everyone that you found me, sort out some formalities." "Formalities?" The boy looked confused. "Are they bad?" "No, a bit tedious, but not bad." Gustavo Moreno laughed. Suddenly he looked at the stuffed rabbit the child was holding. Embroidered on the toy's chest was the name Moreno. Gustavo felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end and a shiver run down his spine. It couldn't be, could it? Was it the same rabbit that little Kay had given to the girl in the shelter? What was her name again? Oh yes, Elena, the girl from the orphanage. "Where did you get this rabbit, boy?" Gustavo asked, putting the boy in the car. "It's been with me since birth." The boy smiled. "I think my mother gave it to me and then left me at the shelter." He looked about 6 years old, but he reasoned like an adult. Gustavo's heart ached. This man had always known what he was doing. Everything in his life was in order, but now the judge was behaving in a completely atypical way. What had happened to him? Why did this boy arouse such a response in his soul, as if he really had been his lost son? Perhaps he just saw himself in this mischievous little one. "Judge Moreno, do you realize what you're doing?" asked Mr. Fernandez, adjusting the glasses on his nose. "That's a child." "I am aware, Mr. Fernandez," Gustavo replied calmly. "I want Vado Moreno to become my son, according to all the rules of the law. I'm going to start the process today, and I believe that all the formalities will be sorted out by Monday, but Monday is only 2 days away. More than enough time if we don't procrastinate and get on with it straight away." The director understood that, for the judge with his connections and influence, this was a matter of 5 minutes. "Can I take the boy away for the weekend and on Monday bring him back here to complete all the formalities?" "I think so," replied the old director, thrusting a blank application form at the interlocutor. "You need to fill this in, that's the procedure." "No problem," said Gustavo, picking up the pen. He was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. "Mr. Fernandez, please tell me, do you keep the children's personal files from previous years, say, 20 years ago?" "Yes, of course, the files are kept for 50 years. Why is that?" "Just over 20 years ago, there was a girl living here with curly hair, Elena. I don't know her surname. I was only a boy at the time, but I still remember her sad, hopeful eyes." "Ah, you're a romantic, Judge Moreno. I've been working here for 10 years. A girl called Elena was released under my supervision. I had just started working at the shelter, but I remember her. She was a bit of a loner, always sitting and drawing. I think her paintings are still hanging in the children's playroom." "Do you follow the subsequent fate of your pupils?" Gustavo asked, running his hand through his hair. "Well, it depends on the circumstances. There are problem children, so sometimes we have to follow up, but usually not. Got it. Can I find out the full name of that graduate, Elena? Of course I have her number. I'll ask the secretary to help with that. As soon as I have the information, I'll let you know, okay? Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. Have a good evening. Goodbye, Mr. Moreno. Vito was sitting in the hallway on a wooden bench, waiting for Gustavo. So, champ, ready to go home? Gustavo winked at him. Hooray! Where's home? Here in court? No, kid. I have a very ordinary home. The man held the boy's hand. Gustavo didn't know what to do with the child. He began to remember his sister. She was 8 years younger than him. Gustavo remembered reading fairy tales to her. Kay would listen, holding her breath, especially if there was something exciting in the stories. Gustavo would read in different voices, playing both the wolf and the poor little goat, or even a mouse. His sister laughed, holding her stomach, and asked for more and more. They had dinner in the gazebo. Gustavo ordered food from a restaurant. Oh, that meat is spicy, exclaimed Vito. Dragon meat, perhaps? Why dragon meat? Gustavo asked, laughing. Because they spit fire. Their meat is probably as spicy as fire. The boy leaned towards the glass of water. I see. Next time, I'll order it without pepper for you. Take some cheese bread, it's certainly not spicy. Are we going to live together? Suddenly asked Vito. Yes, friend, together. Do you think we'll manage? We'll manage, assured the boy, and began to eat his bread. In the forest, it was quiet. Only the soft sobbing of a young girl leaning over a small mound of earth could be heard. At the top, there was a simple wooden cross with no picture, no plaque. Fresh flowers lay on the mound. Forgive me, my little one, for not protecting you, the girl said through her tears. All these years, I've blamed myself for not waking up in time. They didn't even let me say goodbye to you. Why did Diego do this to me? He just said you were dead and buried you here on that fateful night, a few hours after you were born. Elena visited this place regularly. She remembered the baby, the night he was born. For years, she replayed this scene in her head. She was alone in the cabin in the forest. Diego still hadn't returned from the hunt. Why had she gone with him? She was about to give birth. It all started so quickly that Elena didn't even realize at first that the baby was coming. She tried to call Diego, but there was no signal. She couldn't call the ambulance for the same reason. The poor girl didn't know what to do. The contractions started around 4 in the afternoon, and at midnight the baby was born. He was weak, barely crying. Elena was very tired and fell asleep with her son by her side. When she woke up, it was already dawn. The baby was not by her side. Elena jumped up, anxiously looking under the rough bed. No sign of the baby. Diego wasn't in the hut either. The girl left. The birds in the forest sang softly, as if wishing each other good morning. Diego's car was parked not far from the hut, so he had returned from hunting. Suddenly, the guy appeared from the young juniper bushes with a shovel in his hands. Diego, where's our son? Elena shouted and ran towards him. Her belly responded with pain. Elena, our baby, he's gone. When I came into the house, he wasn't breathing and he was as cold as ice. I didn't want you to see that, so I just buried him here in the woods. What? That's a lie. That's a lie. It was your fault that I came to this wilderness. I couldn't even call an ambulance. My baby was born in this fucking hut in the woods. Why didn't you wake me up, you bastard? Elena punched the guy's broad, robust chest with her fists. I'm sorry, I couldn't. I know I'm guilty. Maybe if you'd been at the clinic, things would have been different. You never cared about our son. The girl continued to scream in hysterics. You hardly cared about me. Really, all you cared about was drinking beer with your friends and hunting. I hate you. I hate you. Elena sat down on the damp grass, still covered in dew, and cried, curled up in a ball. Then, suddenly, she jumped up. Where is my son? She demanded an answer. He's nearby. If you want, I'll show you. We'll visit his grave. He led Elena to an old pine tree where there was a mound of fresh earth. The girl knelt down and leaned over this mound, as if over her baby's cradle. My little one, I couldn't protect you. Forgive me. Diego smoked beside her, without looking at the girl overcome with sadness. It wasn't clear from his face whether it was painful to see her or whether he simply didn't care. "Make a cross," Elena told Diego, and walked back to the small house. The girl tied a ribbon she had prepared for her son to a tree on the road, so she would know exactly where to turn. She knew she would return many times to place flowers on her son's grave and cry for hours. She parted company with Diego as soon as they got home. She simply gathered her things and went to live with a friend. He didn't try to stop her. Apparently, he didn't really care about her or the baby. Elena was once again in this cursed place that had taken the life of her little angel. Sometimes it seemed like a nightmare, as if her son was alive and would run to her from somewhere, covering her eyes with his tender little hands. But that never happened. There was just a pile of fresh flowers on it. Soon after dinner, Vito fell asleep. At first, the boys whispered to him that their father was a judge, so he supported the shelter, but he didn't want to take the boy. A fight broke out, and then Vito seized the opportunity and ran straight to the courthouse. And then, the indescribable feeling of happiness that he now had a father. Vito didn't care if he was a judge or a janitor, he just wanted to be someone's son. He wanted to live in a family. That was what all the children in the shelter wanted most in the world. A hearty dinner finally put the boy to sleep at the table. Gustavo carried his son into the living room. He gradually got used to the idea that he now had a son. What was he doing? How did he plan to raise the boy alone? For some reason, these thoughts didn't scare him too much, as if he was waiting for something to happen, something that would help him and Vito make the best life possible. The new father sat down on the sofa next to the sleeping child and played with the stuffed rabbit in his hands. Suddenly, he felt something inside the toy. It felt like a small ball. There was a zipper hidden in the rabbit. He remembered this from when his little sister used to play with it. She even asked her mother to embroider her surname on it so that no one would mistake it and take it away. Gustavo carefully opened the toy. Inside, between the soft filling, there was in fact a plastic ball made of two halves. With a delicate movement of his fingers, he opened it and found a folded piece of paper. There was his portrait. Yes, his portrait when he was about 15. His sister had never liked drawing, and this drawing had clearly been made with love and great skill. Obviously, it was drawn by a talented child. Could it be that the same girl, with her unruly curls and big sad eyes, was Vito's mother? He said he had found the rabbit with him, but why had she left her baby? She knew very well what it meant to be an orphan and not feel parental love. Did circumstances force her? Gustavo decided to find her, or at least find out where she was and what she was doing. Diego returned to the cabin in the forest around midnight. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. There was a strange smell in the cabin. Elena was lying on the bed, holding a package against her chest. What was it? A pillow? He squeezed his eyes shut and lit up with the phone. Oh no, it was a baby. While he was out hunting, his girlfriend had given birth alone, without any medical assistance. Diego's thoughts raced like wild animals in a cage. No one knew the baby had been born. The girl hadn't registered with the clinic. Elena believed that the child had been stillborn. Life is easier without a fragile creature to look after, and he didn't want to lose Elena. Diego acted quickly. He carefully picked up the newborn. He was so weak, so small that for a moment Diego hesitated. But then, he wrapped him in a nearby woolen shawl, placing Elena's favorite bunny inside. She carried him everywhere, like a son. The night allowed for a quick trip with no traffic jams on the road. Diego knew where he needed to go. He parked the car a little way away and approached the building, easily finding the box. He carefully placed the small, warm parcel inside and ran back to the car. On returning to the forest, he began to build a false grave. As he approached the cabin, he found Elena. No one could say whether Diego regretted what he had done, but when he got rid of the baby, he couldn't keep the girl by his side. Mutual acquaintances told Elena that Diego had gone somewhere and disappeared. She didn't care. She realized that she didn't really love him. Heaven had brought them together for the birth of their son, only to take him away afterwards. Silence enveloped the shelter. The pupils had already fallen asleep. The nurse on duty was at her post, trying to fight sleep by reading. Suddenly, the bell rang, indicating that someone was in the box. The young nurse took out the little baby, hastily wrapped in a wool shawl. The doctors didn't have much hope that the boy would survive. He was so weak, but Vito survived. That was the name the nurse on duty who found the baby in the box gave him. They gave him the surname embroidered on the toy that was with him. "Vito Moreno sounds very affirmative," exclaimed the baby's godmother. Perhaps thanks to this name, the fragile boy born in the forest hut survived, thrived, and became a wonderful child with bottomless eyes. On Saturday afternoon, Gustavo took Vito to the amusement park and also organized a meeting with his best friend Jose, who was the head of the children's hospital. "Wow, buddy, you really did it this time. How dare you adopt a child out of the blue like that? Or am I missing something?" laughed Jose. "Jose, I couldn't have done it any other way." He walked straight into my office, as if someone was leading him there. When I looked into his eyes, I knew immediately that we were destined to be together. "That's usually how people talk about girls," Jose laughed. "Come on, you're kidding me." Gustavo slapped his friend on the shoulder. "You know, I suggest we examine the boy tomorrow," Jose said, getting serious. "Is there something wrong with him?" Gustavo asked. "No, just to make sure everything's okay. Let's meet tomorrow at noon. I'll meet you in the lobby." "All right, doctor." "You'd convince a dead man." Gustavo slapped his friend on the shoulder again. The weekend passed unnoticed. Vito was already asleep when Jose called. "Why didn't you just tell me, buddy?" Jose began bluntly. "Told you what?" Gustavo was surprised. "That Vito is your son. I told you the adoption would be official. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about blood relations. The boy is your son. We did a DNA test, just in case." "Jose, you're joking." "It can't be. I don't have children. I haven't been with a woman in years. You're making this up." "A child? Think back to your life about 7 years ago. Maybe you remember some beauty in love." "Ah, come on, Jose. You and your jokes." They talked some more and said goodbye. Gustavo didn't sleep well that night. His friend's words echoed in his head. How could Vito be his son? What had happened in his life 7 years ago? He began to remember. There was Lottie. Yes, Letty had made him dizzy at the time. Gustavo was not yet a judge, could afford such adventures in life, and seriously considered marrying her. He even wanted to ask for her hand, but it just didn't work out. That night, Gustavo flew to his fiery fairy with a bouquet of flowers and a ring in a velvet box in the shape of a rose. He wanted to surprise her and didn't tell the girl he was coming. They were on the porch of her house, he, Letty, and a biker in a leather jacket and black cap. They merged in a long kiss and resolutely didn't notice anyone or anything around them. The young people were clearly completely absorbed in each other. Gustavo felt like he was burning up. She reciprocated his feelings in those unforgettable nights. Was she just toying with his feelings? But when had she managed to get involved with this biker? Or was he already there before him? But they broke up and then got back together. All I could do was guess. Gustavo threw the bouquet and the rose-shaped box onto the grass next to the wheel of the car. He turned the wheel sharply and drove home. As he got closer, he suddenly changed his mind and decided to go to the first nightclub he could find. He wanted to drink and listen to loud music that would at least slightly muffle his pain. The hall was noisy. Young people were having fun. What else to do on a Friday night? Of course, have fun and party. Gustavo immediately noticed a girl sitting alone at a table, ordering and drinking a double whiskey. Gustavo turned to the lonely beauty. "Is this seat taken?" Gustavo asked, turning on all his charm and trying to sound as casual as possible. "No, my friend had a fight with her boyfriend and they left me here," the girl replied. "And you didn't fight with yours?" "No, because I don't have one." She laughed softly. "I'm Gustavo," the young man said, sitting down opposite her. "L," the stranger smiled, "and it sounds beautiful." At that moment, Gustavo didn't care what this beauty's name was. He just wanted to drink and briefly forget his sorrows in her embrace. And he succeeded. She was so young, so incredibly beautiful. The girl didn't ask about anything. She just disappeared from his life like a shadow in the sun. When Gustavo woke up, she was gone. Since then, Gustavo hasn't had any serious relationships. He immersed himself in his work and rose quickly in his career. There was no more time for love affairs. It wasn't appropriate for Judge Moreno to chase after beautiful young women who only wanted to take advantage of his position and money. That wasn't for him. Deep down, he remained a romantic, ready to climb a cliff to rescue his beloved from the clutches of a dragon, the one whose mere look made his heart skip a beat and butterflies fly all over his body. But, unfortunately, Gustavo hadn't found that person yet. Could it have been Elena, Vado's mother? That little girl with tear-filled eyes behind the orphanage fence? Why hadn't she found him? Why didn't she tell him she was expecting a child? Maybe she didn't even know the baby was Gustavo's. She called herself Elle. She might as well have been Elena. Gustavo's heart pounded, as if it wanted to jump out of his chest. Inside, it felt strangely sweet and painful, like when you come back from a long trip to your hometown or a loving home. Gustavo picked up the phone. Elena Sanchez. He read the message from the orphanage director again. "Where can I find you, Elena Sanchez?" Gustavo knew he would find her, and quickly, with his connections. All the issues relating to Vado's adoption had been resolved. Now it was time to look for his mother. Gustavo could afford it after all. His vacation had begun. It was so symbolic that little Vado had come into his life on his last day at work. He didn't know what he wanted to ask Elena. He didn't intend to judge her, but he still wanted to understand what had made her abandon her son. Gustavo drove to the address provided. Elena lived in a remote neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. 4-story houses were crammed together, with almost no space between them. Poverty stared at Gustavo from every corner, but he didn't care. He was looking forward to seeing the one who had appeared in his life like a firefly, the one who had abandoned his newborn son several years ago. Gustavo parked the car and walked to the specified entrance. He dialed the apartment number. "Who is it?" A husky female voice sounded. "May I see Elena Sanchez?" Gustavo's voice trembled slightly. "She's at work," answered the woman on the intercom. "And where does she work?" "At the Café Isla de las Tres Palmas, 2 blocks from here." The laconic interlocutor mumbled and hung up. The cafe turned out to be quite cozy. Tables surrounded an oval island with 3 palm trees. The floor was painted the color of the sea, creating the impression that the tables were on the water. There were few visitors, just 2 couples sitting at tables chatting happily. "Hello?" The waitress with the neat hair and small uniform greeted him. "Did you book a table?" "No." Gustavo was speechless and looked at the girl's name tag. "Elena, Holy Virgin Mary. It's her." "Let me take you to a very comfortable table." The waitress walked between the tables with light steps, as if she were gliding across the floor. "Are you waiting for someone, or will you be alone?" "Alone. Honestly, I wasn't planning on staying long." They reached the table. "Are you Elena Sanchez?" Gustavo asked as he sat down. "Yes, that's right," the girl replied, slightly perplexed. "And you are?" "My name is Gustavo Moreno. Can we talk in a quiet place? It's very important." "Is it related to my work?" "I hope my neighbor Reina hasn't done anything wrong." "No, I just need to talk to you about something that happened a few years ago." "Don't worry. Nothing's threatening you. I just need to clarify something." "I finish at 7, Elena said softly. "Where can we meet?" "I'll pick you up at 7 and we'll sort it out," Gustavo said. "Please bring me a cup of coffee, no milk or sugar." "Right," Elena replied, quickly passing the tables. Gustavo was there at 4 to 7. Elena left the cafe at the beginning of 8. The girl was dressed very simply, jeans and a dark t-shirt with a small gray bag slung over her shoulder. Gustavo got out of the car. "If you don't mind, we can talk in your car," the girl suggested. "Sure. Let's get away from here for a bit." He opened the door. "What did you want to talk about?" Elena asked immediately. "About your son," Gustavo replied calmly. Elena shuddered. "How did you know I had a son?" Elena held her breath. "It's a long story. Where's the stuffed rabbit you loved so much as a child? You're like some kind of magician." Elena tucked a lock of hair behind her ear, asking such strange questions that only I should know about. But apparently, information flows like water. "So, where's the rabbit?" "It's buried with my baby in the woods." That's what my ex-boyfriend told me. "Wait, you didn't give your baby to an orphanage, did you?" "Of course not. What are you talking about? I still visit my son's grave." "Why are you talking about an orphanage?" "Because your son lived there for 6 whole years." Elena looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. "What are you saying?" "My baby died almost immediately after birth. It was in a cabin in the woods. I couldn't call an ambulance. I don't know who told you this, but your son, along with a stuffed rabbit embroidered with Moreno, my surname, lived all those years in the orphanage. They found him in a box, hastily wrapped in a wool shawl, with that same rabbit. Oh my God, the scoundrel. What a scoundrel he is. He left our son in an orphanage and told me he was dead, that he was as cold as ice." Tears ran down the girl's cheeks. Gustavo started the engine. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, crying. "To my house. I'm going to introduce you to Vado." "What Vado?" "Your son and mine." "What do you mean, mine?" "I adopted him first, and then found out that I'm his biological father." "But why do you say he's my son then?" "My son's father was that idiot Diego." On the way, Gustavo told Elena everything. She cried and literally pulled her hair out. "What a fool I am," she scolded herself. "I believed that idiot so easily." "So, you mean to tell me that I've been regularly placing flowers only on a mound of earth? There's been no sign of my boy there for 6 years and 2 months. I live only in anticipation of returning to the forest and sitting on the grass, crying and talking to my son, whom I've only seen for a few minutes. No, that's monstrously unfair. But everything will be fine now. I hope you're not too upset that your son isn't Diego's but mine." Gustavo stopped the car. "We're here." It's hard to describe what happened when Elena saw little Vito. It's easier to say that there were lots of tears, hugs, and tenderness. "Stay with us," Gustavo offered. "I feel out of place in your elegant house," Elena smiled. "Are you a mayor or something?" "No, I'm just a judge." "Wow, you judge people. It must be difficult." "I definitely couldn't do it." "You're right, it is difficult, especially when there's so much corruption and lies in this world. I'm seriously considering changing careers." "So, what do you intend to do?" Elena asked. Vito fell asleep in her arms, and she held him, reluctant to let him go. Imagine, Diego had deprived this boy and Elena herself of the joy of being together for 6 long years. They were separated. Elena never experienced what it was like to raise a child from birth, while Vado grew up in an orphanage, the same place where his mother grew up. Fate sometimes sets incredible traps for us. "I want to write books," Gustavo replied simply. "What's that? You've dedicated your whole life to the law and now all of a sudden you want to write? What will your books be about?" "Well, about love, for example. And I also want to write some exciting detective stories. I have so much to tell the world. I've seen so much in my life. The court cases alone are worth it. People are truly incredible creatures. They do things you can't even imagine. And I never became an artist as I had dreamed of since I was a child." Elena sighed sadly. "You will become one," Gustavo assured her. "Talent can't just disappear. I found that drawing on the rabbit." "How did you do it?" "Oh, just the usual. I sketched it with a pencil." "But you only saw me for 2 minutes at the fence." 2 minutes is enough to make a sketch," the young mother simply replied. "Do you draw well?" "Sometimes I do. I just take a pencil and try to draw something. I've always had to survive. If I hadn't gotten involved with Diego, he would have ruined my life as much as Vado's. Don't exaggerate. He's only slightly shaken up your life, but it will regenerate easily, believe me. We'll make it." Elena's heart beat faster. That "we" spoke louder than any words. She had never had this "we." There was just her and a big hostile world that didn't rush to coddle her, but, on the contrary, often slapped her in the face or even kicked her in the ass. "Thank you, Gustavo," Elena said with emotion. "If it hadn't been for you, I would never have met Vado. I'd still be wandering in that forest crying on the side of the hill. You know, if it hadn't been for my friend Jose, who secretly did a DNA test, I wouldn't even have known that the boy was my blood relative. I was speechless when he told me. In fact, he thought I already knew." "Well, Vado knew." Elena stroked the sleeping boy's back. "Children feel so much more than us adults." Elena stayed to sleep in the room that Gustavo had gradually turned into a nursery. She watched her little son sleeping peacefully in bed and couldn't take her eyes off him. She thought about how they would live now. After all, she needed to officially confirm that she was Vito and Gustavo's mother. He was the father. Imagine, a fleeting encounter makes a man and a woman parents, and yet many don't appreciate it, don't rejoice in what happened, and even blame fate. 7 years ago, Elena couldn't have imagined that her life would turn out like this. "Elle, come with us to the club tonight," suggested Lorena, the girl with whom they were renting a room from an old lady. "But weren't you going with Ricardo?" she asked in surprise. "Then we'll go together." Lorena turned in front of the mirror. "I don't know, nightclubs aren't really my thing." "Ah, come on, let's have fun. Maybe we'll find you a husband." Nevertheless, her friend managed to convince Elena to go with them. Everything started off well until Lorena was asked to dance by a guy. Ricardo made a scene and left the club, and Lorena ran after him, forgetting her friend. Elena decided to stay. She sat alone at the table, and then that handsome guy, with an expensive suit and sadness in his eyes, appeared. The girl felt as if some kind of spark had passed between them, something that had never happened before. It was different with Diego. They had only just met and started dating. At first, she found it interesting that he always wanted to go somewhere. They would walk under the moon, watch the sunrise in a small park or by the river, but then all that romance fell by the wayside. Diego had his own life, friends, hunting, working as a mechanic in a garage, and she, Elena, gradually faded into the background. Then the girl found out she was pregnant. Diego suggested getting rid of the baby at the time, but Elena firmly decided to give her son life, with or without him. She never thought that this person could commit such an atrocity. It's a good thing he took the baby to an orphanage and didn't abandon him by the side of the road. Apparently, there was still a remnant of humanity in him. Elena tried not to think about those terrible events now. She needed to think about her son, her little boy, who had been deprived of a mother's love all these years. They both had to make up for what they had lost. Elena fell asleep holding Vado close to her. She hadn't felt so happy for a long time, not since the moment she gave birth to him in a cabin in the forest, far from civilization. Perhaps she could say that she felt something similar when she was in Gustavo's arms. He was a little drunk and she wasn't completely sober, but it didn't matter. They were happy together that night, very happy. "Vito, darling," Daddy called for dinner. Elena called out to her son, who was drawing in the living room. "I'm coming, Mommy." The boy ran into his father's study. They entered the kitchen together. What's that smell?" Gustavo sniffed the air. "Meat with vegetables," Elena replied, drying her hands with a cloth. "And why didn't I meet you before?" He kissed his wife on the shoulder. "I would have enjoyed delicious food like this." "You don't have to flatter me," Elena joked, poking her husband in the stomach. "Maria, your cook, is excellent. Yes, but it's still not the same. Have you finished that wonderful sunset?" "Just a few finishing touches. And how's your detective novel?" "Oh, it's intense now. It gives me goosebumps. I can't wait to read it." "You'll definitely get the chance, probably in a few weeks." "And I got a B in Spanish," said Vado suddenly, taking a bite out of his meat. "What?" his parents exclaimed in unison. "Vado was an excellent student." "Ha ha ha! I got you!" Vado burst into laughter. "You were sitting there believing I'd written a sunset. I'm finishing a book. I had to stand out somehow." "You naughty boy," your mother protested. "We went over all the rules with you yesterday." "But you can stand out in other ways, son." His father ruffled his hair. "How?" Vito asked, taking a sip of juice from his glass. Well, for example, by building a nice house out of building blocks. That's common. Any child can do that. No, not everyone. We can build it together and then decorate it with, say, shells. We have lots of them. Elena looked lovingly at her son. No, let's walk together after dinner, Vito suggested. That's how we stand out. What's so special about that? His mother asked. The fact that we're the coolest family in the universe. The boy held out his hand, and his parents did the same. They clenched their fists. It was their ritual. How great it was that those naughty boys from the shelter who teased little Vito so cruelly told him that Judge Moreno was his father, the one who put him in the shelter. If it hadn't been for them, that magical flower, the Moreno family, wouldn't have bloomed now.